In this week's show, we will be discussing a topic of a sensitive nature. Our guest lost his brother to suicide, and he is going to tell us how it's impacted his family and how we were discussing before the show that there is intersection between spirituality and uh, you know daily life. And with my work as a chaplain, we discuss how um, your faith can help you overcome great challenges, and sometimes it can also bring you down because you have so many expectations of how life should be, how people that behave in a certain manner should be rewarded for their actions, and then life throws curveballs at you, and it debilitates you emotionally and spiritually. So um, we know each other very little. So I would like to for you to start from tell me a little bit about your family structure and some of the challenges that your brother went through before this happened.
Hi, David. First of all, thank you very much for having me on the show. It's not often that I get to speak about what happened. It's a difficult process and a healing one at the same time to be able to share what we experienced with you and with the audience. So thank you very much. I'll start by saying that we're a very close-knit family. There are six of us, the siblings and my parents, and we've been very, very close. We're perhaps after this we're even closer, and growing up together definitely had its challenges. He was always a challenged boy. He from the time of about 9 or 10 years old, we could tell he was severely depressed, and it would manifest in many ways, many of which I suffered from, and some of the other siblings suffered from. But as we grew older, it became a thing that we could get a little more, that we could understand a little bit more, and we grew a lot closer, only to have him taken away from us at a later age. He passed about 11 months ago. We're coming up on the close of the first year, and he was 23 years old when he passed.
Well,
And that was 23 beautiful years we had with him.
thank you for putting it like that. I've met a few people who've lost their children, and they felt that they didn't get the resources they needed from their counselors, or part of being a young person is that you go through a lot of turmoil. Sometimes you have disappointments or expectations that are not met, and you fall into this type of tunnel vision where the only thing that can soothe the pain is to take your life. Do you feel that your brother had access to resources to help him overcome his depression, or did he become isolated to the point of him not being able to express his pain in a healthy way?
That's a very interesting question. I think it's a little bit of a mixture of both. In terms of resources, he had access to all those made available. Thank God we were able to afford all different sorts of treatments, whether conventional or experimental. And we were able to take him to some of the leading experts in the field, and unfortunately nothing seemed to help. To my untrained eye, and as well the brother who was closest to him, it appeared to me that the resources are something that are not yet available. I knew couple people suffering from depression who also took their lives, and it was maddening to see these people wasting away to an extent, and there's nothing out there that is helping them. And do I think there's something out there that could have helped him? I do. I think that to an extent, if he would have found something, if he would have been able to do what he loved, that might have perhaps helped him to an extent that when you combine that together with medications or anything else, perhaps it would have helped ease the pain and help him edge out of the issue. But for better or for worse, today we live in a world that requires major qualification processes before you do anything, and he unfortunately wasn't able to get there, and wasn't able to bring himself to that, and it culminated in the way it did.
So tell us about him. You said that not being able to do what he loves. So what did he love? What were the things that gave him joy and strength? And what was the thing that caused the most pain? There are sometimes chemical disbalances that cause people to fall into depression. Sometimes it's almost like a genetic melancholy that you have passed on through generations. Sometimes it's situational where things don't pan out or you're under constant stress. So let's focus on the positives first, and then we can talk about the individualized things that brought him to this state of despair. What was the thing that he loved the most that you said that appeared he didn't have access to?
My brother of blessed memory, Avidan, had a heart of gold. He was the nicest person that you could find, and he had two passions, and those were helping people and helping dogs. And it's funny. He and I rented an apartment together actually for a while. We were flatmates or roommates or whatever you want to call it. And I remember one day I'm sitting there minding my own business, and we're living in this tiny apartment. There's barely room for the three of us, two of us, and our third flatmate. And he all of a sudden walks in one day with this massive German Shepherd, and my mouth drops open. I'm like, "What are you doing with that thing? What are you?" He's like, "I'm going to train it, and I'm going to take care of it, and this is my baby now." And unfortunately, at that point, his health had reached a point that it was too difficult for him to take care of the dog, and he made sure to find a new safe home for it. But his passion was dogs. He learned how to train dogs. He bought a special suit for training dogs. One of those things where if the dogs try to bite you, you don't feel it. And that was I have another brother who's a little bit autistic. He would sit there and grill him all day on everything about dogs, and Avidan would just sit there answering his questions calmly. Up, there's that type of dog, and that one gets this aggressive, and this one likes animals this much, and it was quite interesting to see him in his element.
And when you said that he had health issues, were they separate from emotional challenges, or those were the health issues?
Well, he suffered from I'd like to call it anorexia, but it's not. It wasn't your typical anorexia. His stomach got really small, and eating would cause him a lot of pain. But this was after he was severely depressed, and after he had been abused, and it was it's hard to say exactly. It's hard to say that it was not connected to what he was experiencing emotionally. I think it was very much connected, and it stemmed from there. But it got to the point where he was so weak and he was so thin that we we took him to a doctor who said if you don't hospitalize him within a month, he's dead. And it was we were finally able to get him into the hospital. But I remember back then, we were flatmates. I told you my goal was I just have to buy him the right foods that he can eat, and it was a that was a difficult period of time right there, just trying to keep him alive through all of that.
And we don't want to pry, but whatever you feel comfortable sharing. You mentioned him being abused. Who was he abused by, and what was that connected to?
uh, Hey, well, I appreciate the consideration. I'm on here to share the story, and even if it's difficult, I I want to be able to share that with you and with the listeners. He was minding his own business one day, and I know this because he was with me immediately prior to this happening, and I have a lot of respect for our men in blue, for our good cops who take care of us and protect us, and really more power to them. Unfortunately, there are some bad apples, as in every profession in life, and they couple of those bad apples who it turns out had been caught on camera doing this to other children, um, came one day and picked him up and beat him up and tased him and really got him bad, and then they took him to a local cell, and wouldn't let him call his parents. And he was there for a couple of days, and we went down to the police department to file a missing persons report, and they said, oh, he's not missing. And that was a shocker for us. um, and that whole episode sort of screwed him over for later as well, because they just after that, when we complained to them, they sort of opened a file against him and left it that way for a good year and a half until we got a lawyer to close it, because they just wanted to get back at him, and that open file hurt him in other things he wanted to do.
When you say he was minding his business, was he in the wrong side of town? Is this a group of police officers that just harassed? And you say children, was he in his teens? Like, what are the circumstances around this episode?
Yeah, sure. That's a great question. He was 17 years old, and he was actually on the very street that he lived on. It was it was definitely not the wrong side of town. um, but he I'm trying to recall your other question. I'm sorry.
So they just rough up children that they consider to be
Oh,
out and
that's right.
about, or
I think they roughed up children who looked unloved. There were two other cases on record where they had done this. One where they had been caught on camera, where they caught a kid out of nowhere, and they decided to do this to him. And he looked back then like a teenager. How else will I put it? He had the torn jeans and the t-shirts that didn't really fit well, and I think the police found him. They said, "Oh, his parents don't have money, or they don't care as much about him. We live in a religious neighborhood, and sometimes you have parents here who have difficulty come to terms with the fact that their son is a little bit different, and so I think they identified him as one of those, and they did what they did, and that was unfortunately had a terrible impact on him and on the rest of us, an absolutely terrible impact. But they didn't know who they were messing with. So,
well, to
but
contextualize his experience, in the U.S. we have certain groups that are targeted, and they feel like it's racial profiling, that if they're out in the street, they're considered to be criminals or in the process of committing a crime or just up to no good. And usually it falls into people of darker skin. But if you really think about it, even back in the 30s and the times where there was a lot of social turmoil throughout American history, it was usually the poor that ended up being mistreated by the authorities. And it just happens that the majority of the poor uh, are of minority races. So when you share about people in a religious neighborhood experiencing that, we have to contextualize for our audience, where do you guys live and all that. And I know it's a heavy topic because of the way that people perceive things, but when when you think of migration and where people feel safe or where people live by choice, there's a lot of issues on who was there first and who should have access and stuff like that. So um, to disclose for our audience, so you guys are expats from the U.S. who moved to a religious neighborhood in Israel, correct?
Yeah, that is correct. We moved to Israel. One of the best things we ever did, actually, for him specifically, and we can come to that. But it's funny you mentioned that that matter of the ethnic minorities, because here in Israel, everyone's part of some minority. What we are is a bunch of people who came from all different countries and all different places. But I will say that what was interesting was that the two cops, one of them, and for so as not to offend anyone or not to strengthen any stereotypes, maybe it's better if I don't say what race this man belonged to, but he was. Let's just say that one of the two cops was belonged to a group that is often racially discriminated against. But I think he had found himself a powerful spot in life, and then went to discriminate against others, against the religious, or against teenagers, or I don't know what it was that did it for him, but that was very unfortunate.
Well, and it's important that you bring that up because during the racial tension that happened last year here in the U.S., there was a lot of accusations that the police officers that were being challenged, that some of them were from the race that it mostly gets discriminated or even killed, and that somehow being part of the authoritative system, that you're part of the problem. So I heard a story, and I'm Hispanic, so I can share this. I heard a story of a Latino who was part of the riot police, or the police that was trying to keep protests from becoming violent, and other Latinos were angry that that there was a Latino in the police force, and I was like thinking, well, wouldn't you want to be represented in the police force? So then maybe it wouldn't be as um, discriminatory or as um, e- uneven-handed. Like if you have people that don't know the culture, they don't understand the population, and they go into your neighborhood, it's easier to have conflict. But if you have someone from your own people, instead of seeing them as an Uncle Tom, you can have them as an advocate for your needs. And the way that the Latino cop expressed to his friends was that he was just doing his job, that he wasn't out there to bust heads or to keep people from expressing themselves. He was trying to protect and serve as they're supposed to, and that he just happened to be caught in the middle of a bigger conflict. So that those are the nuances that people sometimes forget. They want to make everything, for lack of a better term, black and white, and that
Mhm.
either you're part of the problem, part of the solution. And some of the people who were stirring up complaints, they were making it into a bigger problem because they were portraying the cause in a non-effective and even threatening way. So it was hard for them to get their message across by getting in people's faces, by breaking things, by acting in rowdy ways. And they were just feeding into the stereotypes and the negative views of that people have about them. So we have to be very conscious of our actions. And the same goes for the police. If the police has a bad relationship with a neighborhood, why keep feeding into it by mistreating the members of that community? You would think that they would try to build relationships and try to appease any type of disagreements or conflicts. But sometimes, like you said, some people are drunk with power, and they just want to show off that they're able to do whatever they want with impunity.
I think that's an excellent point. Our police force here definitely suffers from a lack of multiculturalism. Uh, Israel out of necessity is quite a bit of a military state. When you're 18, about 70% of the population goes straight to serve in the military as soon as they turn 18, or some defer it for a couple of years and then they serve. But that leads to a sort of melting pot within the military, a sort of cultural training of a sort. If you lived in Israel at that point, those who come later are not a part of that culture. Those who, like my parents, who came with young children, come with their own culture, and it creates a gap. It creates a barrier. And in the police force, all the guys are ex-military. They're all Israeli, born and bred, and born and raised, and that was it made complaining very difficult. It made getting to them very difficult. And let's be honest, we do live in a low crime neighborhood. Very generally in the religious neighborhoods, you do not have violent crime. You have crimes of other sorts, but violent crime is about non-existent. And so they don't really send the great cops to our area. They send the ones who they have to put somewhere. And so that's the result, unfortunately.
And has your family always been open to counseling and expression of emotions? Because my experience with religious folks has always been that they're almost like military in the sense of you walk it off if you have any challenges, you give it all up to God. You are a bad religious person if you don't handle your own businesses, in the sense of you don't publicize your weaknesses or your family conflict. You have to kind of keep up front and make your family proud. And anything that is characterized as mentally affecting you is looked down as being crazy or being outside of God's realm of handling things. Has your family had the type of environment where someone with mental health challenges or emotional struggles can express that and find the help that they need?
David, it's so important that you're asking this question, because it's funny. I think different groups of people have that stereotype about other groups, right? We like to think that about the British, that because here in Israel, we know a lot of our neighbors are British, and we have this impression of them that, like, oh, they're these people who don't really express their emotions. That's that's our stereotype. But it's a very important question, and I can tell you that it's hard to put. I can tell you what our experience is. It's hard to put. I suppose the issue with the nature of stereotyping is that you're taking a lot of different people and and attributing a specific quality people who at the end of the day are just that, are different people. But to answer your question, we are a family that definitely uh, very much encourages openness of emotion. I think significantly more than some other families I know. But it's always been encouraged within our family. It's always been a thing, and we are. Hey, look, I'm on the show today. You know, it's I think it's part of the culture of openness that we experience in our family. But I will say that in the aftermath, we brought a social worker to the home who sat down and spoke with all of us. Uh, this this experience definitely stirred up some of my own demons, so to speak. And so I've actually been in therapy for several months now, uh, and it's a tough healing process. But we are, for each other and for the others in our lives, we're determined to pull through. We're determined to heal and to not to leave this in, not to let this fester on the inside, only to manifest later in other undesirable ways. But we want to be the best we can be. You know, if we can, if we can look, if David, I'm gonna get a little philosophical here. Is that okay?
Sure. And I was about to do it myself, but go ahead.
Okay, fine, no problem. No, I was just gonna say that when you look at the world with a more global perspective and look at what everyone can contribute, and you ask yourself, how can we prevent this from happening more in the future? You know, I said the treatments aren't out there yet. Well, how can we develop treatments? How can we raise awareness? And the answer that keeps coming back to me is that everybody just has to give life their max. And if you are not, if you are able to reach, you know, this is what I said to myself, at least everyone has to do their own, you know, their own cheshbon nefesh, as we say in Hebrew, right? Everybody has to figure out for themselves what's best for them. But I had to say to myself, look, if you cannot put yourself, if you don't have the strength to put yourself on a path to recovery for your wife, for your daughter, for your siblings and your parents who just experienced a significant loss as well, that's selfish. That that's being a part of the problem. I said I want to be a part of the solution. I'm studying social work now because I want to help deal with such problems in the future. But I said I want to be a part of the solution. I want to be able to build a world in which future Abidans will be able to feel comfortable, will be able to find themselves, and hopefully we'll be able to live a very different life.
Well, I wanted to share that I'm actually a grief specialist dealing with anticipatory grief when people are in the dying process. I work with people who are from 0 to 102, literally with children and adults who are in hospice, and then with the families who are supporting them. And you take into consideration so much of their environment, the way they deal with their mortality, their cultural traditions. Everything comes into the forefront. So when I came across, just like you were saying, there's good cops and bad cops. There's good religious leaders and bad religious leaders. I came across within our tradition that it was very similar to the Roman Catholic Church old way of looking at things, where if someone loses their life through suicide, that they think of it as like a conscious choice, that it is almost like an act of rebellion against God, and that some authorities would dismiss that person and find no compassion towards them and their experience. I was shocked because that's not the way I was trained, and that's not the way that I look at something as difficult as this experience. But I also had training at a suicide prevention um, uh, phone line where people would call and tell us that they were ready to take their lives, and we would try to process with them and get them outside of the tunnel vision. So, was your guys' experience, and again, with all sensitivity in mind, was it a supportive situation when it happened, when it recently happened, or was there shame and judgment coming from the people that they were supposed to help you in, throughout that very challenging experience?
Wow, what a wonderful question. It's a something I I'm going to share something right now with you and with the audience. I hope is not a little too much. But you mentioned before the power of genetics in something like this, and I, as a teenager, also went through a period of time when I was experiencing suicidal inclinations, and I remember that then I said, you know what, I was always a doer. I said I'm gonna research this topic as far as our religion is concerned. I want to know. I want there are stuff that all sorts of religious leaders may like to say about it. I want to try and dig as deep as I can get to the source. What does God say about it? And so I consulted with religious leaders and I looked at different sources and I discovered afterwards that the conclusion I arrived at was not very different than the conclusion that is the more dominant one in our culture today as well, which is there are different reasons why a person may take their life. Today the dominant reason seems to be depression, but there are other reasons. There are cultures such as there's that stigma about Japanese culture, which perhaps was more correct 100 years ago than it is today, but about cultural suicide. There were deities back in the day that for which the way of serving them was through suicide, and it turns out that when our religion speaks very strongly about suicide, but it's not if you're sick. It's not if you're ill. It's suicide should never become a part of our culture. Suicide is a horrible tragedy, and it should never become a part of our culture. And I think that's what our religion was referencing. Um, but you know what? I will say that we had an outpouring of love. We really did, and I drifted a little more to the right wing, as they'll say religiously, and so a lot of the people who came to visit us afterwards were from that more religious sector, and totally full of respect and encouragement, and told us that we were doing the right thing to mourn him, and that and he was certainly in a better place. But uh, can I share with you another experience I had shortly afterwards?
Sure.
I I teach boys. I prepare them for their bar mitzvahs, and about 3 months after my own experience with my brother, unfortunately, we got a call. Apparently, a student of mine from a couple of years back, his brother just went the same way, and it was a devastating blow. At that point, my brother had just passed away. My father-in-law had passed away 2 months later from a sudden heart attack, and I, my at that point mentally, I was falling apart. I was like, everybody in my life is dying. I don't know how to handle this. But I picked myself up, and we Jews, we have a tradition that when somebody close to us passes away, we sit on the floor or on a low chair for a few days, and people come and wish us well. And we call it the Shiva process. And I remember I visited their Shiva, these people who just experienced something so painfully similar to what I had just experienced myself. And I come there and I find a widow, and I find a brother, and I find a mother, and I find a father. And what tore my heart out was to see the widow sitting there and saying, but where is he now? Is he burning in hell right now, or the Jewish equivalent, right? is he what's going on? Did he commit this terrible sin? And she said, I love my husband. I care about him. What happens to him? What's going to happen to him now? And David, I got to tell you, that tore my heart out, because this is a woman who just lost her husband. And on the one hand, I said to her, this is so beautiful that, you could feel alone right now. You could feel like he left you. You could feel upset. You can feel resentment. And that's not what you're expressing. You're expressing just your love for him. But the fact that this is an issue is I think the difficulty with education on our part. We're not educating about this correctly in some of the religious circles. And I sat down there and I said, look, I researched this a few years ago, and I just had to experience this with my brother now, and here's what I could tell as far as what our religious law says. And they found it very helpful. But David, I think that, look, suicide education is difficult. You don't want to come to a group of teenagers and tell them, oh, suicide's okay, right? That would be horrible. That would be a terrible thing to do. But how do you treat this the right way? How do you educate about it in a way that doesn't say it's okay, you can do it, right? Because they can't. But on the other hand, we can say, but if you do it out of illness, then you're okay. You're God's loved one. And that's something that we have to find a way to perhaps teach about better.
Well, there's a lot of existential questions related to, even having the choice of being able to take our lives, and how the majority of the animal kingdom, that's the last thing they would do, because the self-preservation instinct is greater than the harming instinct. So if you just look at it from a natural perspective, it has to be something outside of the normal parameters of someone being able to make rational choices. But when it comes down to our eternal destiny and things like that, each tradition has a way to answer those questions. And the bigger challenge is, how do you let people find their own answers? I know as a chaplain, people ask me direct questions too, like, what happens to someone after they die, and how long does it take for them to reach God, and do they come back at a certain point in the resurrection, or are they in a place in between, or this and that? And I tell people that the difference between a social worker and a religious leader is that a social worker would ask you, well, what do you think? And leave you hanging. And a religious leader has almost like an obligation to give them some comfort and some answers, because they see you as an authority on the subject. And for people who believe in the Bible or rabbinic tradition, that's what gives them comfort, that it's not an open question, that there's actually greater people than ourselves who have pondered these questions, and they've gotten some type of answer from God, and that is what gives us hope. But the one thing that is difficult to overcome is people having a punitive view of God, where everything you do comes to the forefront, and that you are constantly in trouble. And some people overemphasize the loving God, and there is no reward or punishment at all. And then other people, that's all they talk about, and God has no mercy or compassion. So it's also finding a balance between right and wrong, and what's acceptable and what's not. And those are very difficult things that people have been debating for thousands of years. But at the moment of someone's grief, we have to provide uh, that reassurance that we're there with them through their journey. So I appreciate you taking the time, and even as difficult and painful as it was for you, to comfort that widow and to let them know that you were with them in their pain. And I think that's what really makes a difference. It's almost like when I think of God visiting Abraham after his circumcision, like we know that God cares because he showed up, and we emulate
Very
that.
good. Very good. I've never heard it put that way before. Yeah, absolutely. Um, I snap. I just lost the train of thought.
It,
Um,
it's okay. So again, there's many existential things that come to the forefront when someone thinks about uh,
yeah,
something like that. Go ahead.
yeah. No, that's right. No, I just wanted to say that when we think about God, God created us in His image. I think what we often try to do is we try to create God in our image, right? We try to perceive God according to our concepts, according to the way we see life, and uh, some people connect more to, as you said, a more punitive side of life. They enjoy it when the boundaries are a little tighter, and when everything has its precise place, and when hard work is met, or when I guess slackers are offered the stick, that they feel is a very is the way to connect to God, and the way to connect to creating a better world. And there's definitely room for that, and at the same time you have the other people, those who just see, let's say the stereotypical hippie, right? The ones who are like, it's cool, man, let's dance and thank God, and everything has its place, but God created us in His image. That means if we are if we are compassionate, if we love others, if we can come and say, my intent of punishing you is only to help you improve, is only to help you get better. Do you think God's any worse the person than us? Right? Do you think God is standing there taking notes, saying, wow, I created them in my image and they did it better. Let me figure out how to do this better. God created us in His image because He sees that the perfection that as humanity hope we are crawling towards, that is a part of who He is. And that's I think that's what gives us the strength to be compassionate and to be kind, and ultimately that's the way, that's how God treats us as well.
And I always tell people that it is a huge blessing to have family support and family unity when these challenges come your way, because I've been and seen situations where someone is completely lonely and facing death on your own, facing the death of a loved one, facing illness on your own, or depression on your own can be even more challenging and more destructive and unhealthy. So uh, we know that in life we're going to face challenges, but when we don't have a support system, they're compounded, and grief is so debilitating that I'm glad that your family is able to be by your side in this journey, because it's a fog that overcomes you for the first year, and then the second year is even more painful because all the memories start kicking in, and the anniversaries and the times where the person is not there become even more painful.
Yeah, David, it's a terrible experience to go through, something like this, especially when you're alone. And in this, I definitely was very fortunate to have a tremendously supportive environment around me. But you're right. And look, I disclosed before that I've suffered from mental illness before, and when you're in that situation, you can have a lot of people around you, and you feel alone. You can feel very alone, and you don't know who to talk to about your illness, right? You don't know. You don't know who's going to look at you the wrong way, who's going to fire you from your job, who's going to uh, uh, who's going to kick you out of the house, you don't know. You don't know how people are going to react, and the feeling is gut wrenching. And I remember when I was younger and I was experiencing this, and it, it, it was a feeling of if only I could, if only I could express this to others, perhaps I would heal faster. Perhaps I would be able to find the support and the love and compassion that I need in order to go on. And unfortunately, there's we're trying, but there's still a lot of stigma, and there's still a lot of people have difficulty come to terms. And by the way, I do understand some of it, right? People talk today about triggers, and I think that depression is a trigger for all of us, for all of humanity. Because let's face it, who hasn't felt depressed before, right? And who hasn't wanted to run away from it with everything they've got? And so you see someone who's depressed, you see somebody who's there sitting there suffering, and wait a second, that's a trigger to me. That's a trigger to every person on the face of the planet. And so when we see somebody in that situation, we tend to sort of move away. We tend to take a step back and say, look, I got to protect myself. This is difficult for me to deal with. And that's that. And on the one hand, that there's something very healthy in that response, because we do need to take care of ourselves in order to help others. But at the same time, that suggests that there's something suppressed, David, because if there's one thing that I've learned, I've gone through depression of some of the worst kind, and I've come out of it stronger. And I can tell you from experience that no matter how much of a trigger depression is for me, I'm able to handle it. I'm able to go in there in the trenches and help other people deal with it today, because I made sure to heal, because I didn't leave it in there suppressed and and push it in deeper and let it fester and rot and become the monster. And I'd like to suggest to anybody who has difficulty, if you have somebody in your life with depression and it's difficult for you to handle it, then perhaps go seek therapy. Perhaps take that step towards healing yourself. It's not selfish. It's not selfish if you say, I'm going to focus on healing myself in order so that I can be a better caretaker to this person, a better friend, a better parent, a better child, whatever it is. I think ultimately my own work on myself was what allowed me to be able to be there for my brother in some of his more difficult times. And today, as a teacher and as a social worker, allows me to be there for others as well.
And to connect it to your last comment, I always think about the putting on the mask on the plane when the oxygen is low. You can't help anyone unless you have the oxygen first, and you can help them put on their mask. The same goes for in Judaism. There's the same concept in Christianity that you should love your neighbor as yourself. And I think loving yourself gives you the ability to be able to love your neighbor, because if you don't have self-love, if you don't have self-compassion, if you don't take care of your own health needs, you have nothing to give. So there's a lot of people in my field that say, well, what do you do to fill your cup? And of course they're quoting Psalm 23, where it says that God fills our cup to overflow. But there are people that all they do is give, and they run out. And that's what we talk about in hospice is caregiver strain or caregiver fatigue, where unless you refuel through self-care or reaching out to God or reaching out to people that fill you up, you really not able to help anybody else. So When someone is overcome with, personal grief, like depression is a form of suffering where someone feels so disheartened about life, and that the options they have in front of them are not fulfilling, and the the feelings are so overwhelming. Uh, Being a loving, kind person towards them can go a long ways. And as talking about grief in general, grief cannot be cured, cannot be medicated. It can only be experienced, and it can be experienced in a healthy way, and it can be experienced in an unhealthy way. So the more people are around you, the more you talk it out, the more you um, face that challenge in a healthy environment, the more, like you said, you can come out stronger and learn to cope and find grounding techniques to not allow that pain to destroy you. So in your own grief journey, how do you uh, face the days where you don't even want to get out of bed because you're so distraught about what happened to your brother? What gives you hope and strength in the midst of this huge challenge?
Wow, that's a really hard one. I still don't know the answer. I'm trying to find it. Look, I'll share with you another anecdote. I hope those aren't getting too much by now. But before I was married, I was working as a dorm counselor in a high school for youth that were sort of in between. That, you couldn't call them officially troubled, but they definitely weren't fitting in anywhere else, and there were a lot of difficulties we were dealing with. And I remember I got completely burnt out, completely overwhelmed, and I was sitting with a social worker who was running this school, and he says to me, he says, "Look," he says, "you know how I do it?" He said, "Because I go home to my family." He said, "Are you doing something else in your life from which you can pull strength for this?" And my answer then was no. My answer then was I was sort of dysfunctional. All I was a dorm counselor, and then I wasn't doing anything during the day. And now I have a family. I have a wife and a daughter, and uh, it's been it's been it's been very difficult. And there are days when I have to say, "Look, your wife and your daughter need you. You can't break apart." And there have been days when I say, let me just spend some time with my wife and my daughter, and pull strength from this beautiful source of energy that I have right in front of me. And that, again, that's also not selfish. That's what you need to do in order to help others better, like you said about the oxygen masks. But I think that what you need to do if you're going to pull through something like this, you need to have a support system, and you need to have something you're doing in life that can give you some sort of closure. I actually wrote a poem after my brother passed. I wrote a poem expressing a little bit of my own emotions about it. It took me a few months to write that poem, I'll tell you. I had the idea already in my head shortly after the passing, and I wasn't able to write it just yet. I wasn't mentally prepared. Now I write stories about him because he was an absolutely phenomenal human being. He was a very, very special human being, and so I'm writing stories and putting them on Facebook, and who knows, maybe I'll compile them into a book. But one of the things I learned in my classes to become a social worker was that the best coping method, the one that provides true healing, is when you take your experiences and you use those in order to create something. And that something you're creating, it can be a piece of art, it could be a new reality in the world around you. It could be even just a new perspective, whatever you want it to be. But if you take your experiences and you use that to go and you fight through the tears, and you fight through those days of maddening depression when you don't want to get out of bed, and you can barely look the world in the eye, and you say, today I'm going to create something special. I'm going to create something new. I'm going to create something with some of myself in it. And you know what? I'm going to create something with some of my pain in it. Because the world doesn't just need your perfect face. The world needs you as you are. The world needs all of you. And that includes your pain and everything everything that you can bring to the world from who you are is a blessed thing.
Well, just wanted to thank you for your time, and also for the people who are listening to us on radio. If we can get Rafael to share his poem, we will post it on the web version of our show, because we're running out of time for the hour. But I don't know. So if anybody wants to listen to poem, or wants to, if he shares it with us on Facebook or on our website, we can post it as well, because the arts is a great way um, to heal. It's a therapeutic thing to do artistic things, and I think that's one of the gifts that God gave us, is the ability to express ourselves and to share that with others.
How about we'll do this, David? Let me think after the show whether or not I want to share it. It is a bit of a personal poem. There are I reference in there certain things that only he and I could understand, and I wanna think about that, but I'll consider it, and I'll let you know after the show.
So we want to thank Rafael for sharing his experience, and we want to offer our condolences and love to your family. It is a very brave thing to share such a painful part of your history, but it is also, like we've been talking about, healing to find ways to honor your loved one by seeking opportunities to educate or even encourage people who might be going through similar challenges. So we want to thank you for, like we say in Judaism, his memory is becoming a blessing as you are advocating for others who might be going through the same thing.
Yeah, David, thank you so much for the opportunity. Thank you to everyone who's listening, and hopefully this can bring about only good things as we move forward and look towards a brighter future.
A question that, there's the traditional ways to memorialize someone, such as certain prayers you say on their behalf, and then the tombstone a year later. But is there any particular ways that you guys remember him as a family that helps you through the grief process, or you're just following the traditional modes of remembrance?
Well, we're definitely following tradition. That's a solid one for us, and we're finding that tradition is indeed very helpful and very comforting. However, I spoke to you about his kindness and about his love for dogs, and he when he went, when he went, he first was missing for a couple of days, and we had to search for him. And we got in touch with a dog unit, a citizen dog unit, and they came down and they searched for him until they found his body. And what we had decided, what my father decided, was that this was a cause that would be dear to him if he were alive. Dogs were always something so special to him. And now, and so we got together and we raised money, and we bought them a new vehicle, because their vehicle was falling apart, and they needed another one with which to find people. But there's a lot of charity happening in his memory. There's a I'm writing about him, and we're hoping to perhaps his legacy of kindness to push that onwards, and for his kindness to continue to live in each of us. The thing about my brother Avidan is that he was one of the most special people you'll ever meet, and I think that was one of the reasons why it was difficult for him to put up with a world in which that's not necessarily like that. But he, I mean, there was a chemical imbalance as well. But when he was 9 years old, 10 years old, he was selectively mute, and he would wear a coat in the dead of the summer. He was very, very depressed already. When we came to Israel, though, he began to come out of that. Began to perhaps get a little healthier, and unfortunately didn't last. But he was he was always into helping people. That was a strong passion of his. That some days he would take the car, and he could be depressed as hell, but he would take the car, and he would go out, and he would just pick up hitchhikers and just bring them wherever they want to go. He'd be like, "Where are you going?" They'd say, "Oh, I'm going to this out of the way place you've never heard of." And he's like, "Oh, I just happen to be going there as well," And he would spend his way doing favors like that for people. I remember one story we heard shortly after his passing. A friend of his came and said, "Thanks to your brother, I have my career." And I was shocked. This made no sense to me. I'm like, "What do you mean?" Guy's a successful event photographer. He goes to weddings and bar mitzvahs, and he takes photos. And he said, "Your brother, I never thought to be a photographer, but your brother would go out into the hills with me and tell me to take pictures of pretty things, and then when your family had an event," this guy told me, he said, "Avidan said to me, 'You're going to be the photographer.'" And I was like, "What are you talking about? I've never done this before. Don't your parents deserve better than?" And Avidan looked at him and said, No, I'll talk to my mom. I'll explain to her the situation. You're going to be the photographer." And those were some of the best photographs I've ever seen, let me tell you. And from there, his career just took off. My mother blasted him all over Facebook, and that was that. And I wish we had enough time for me to go through and tell you story after story of what this boy did for others. Maybe I'll just share one more with you. But he, shortly before his death, when things were at the worst, one day he said to my dad, "You know what, Dad, let's spend a day just delivering home appliances or food to needy people." My dad's like, "Okay, that's a great idea. How do you propose we do this?" And they got into the car, and they found people who were giving things away, perhaps selling things for discounted prices. They went, picked up loaded washing machines and refrigerators and I don't know, all sorts of stuff into the car. And it would take them and just drop them off at the homes of needy families. And they woke up the next morning, and my father's like exhausted, and he's like, "Okay, I get to take a break. I'm glad we did that, but I want to take a break." And Avidan walks right up to him and goes, "Hey, Dad, are we doing it again today?" Full of enthusiasm. And remember, this was a boy who was so depressed that he was going to kill himself 4 months later. But all he wanted was just to go out there and help others. He would smile at us, even though inside he was crying. And that was phenomenal. Even some of his best friends told us we never knew he was depressed. And I'm not recommending keeping it a secret from your best friends, but if you are going through something like that, but this was a boy who just wanted to bring joy and just wanted to bring happiness into the lives of others. And it was a phenomenal thing to be able to know him and grow up beside him and be his brother and now to have those memories and pass them onwards.
Thank you so much for your availability, and we can talk forever. So I'm glad that we can become friends and have honest conversations. So thanks a lot.
When you meet a good person, it's hard to stop talking. That's from my experience.
Wonderful.
So it was wonderful to meet you, David.
Many blessings, and we'll stay in touch. Take care, man.
You as well. Thank you. Have a good night, I suppose.
There you go. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.